In 1809, Leeds was shaken by a series of deaths that defied explanation. Families fell ill after sharing meals, trusted neighbors suddenly collapsed, and whispers spread that dark forces were at work. At the center of it all stood one woman, charming to some, terrifying to others, who promised blessings and protection while secretly leaving behind nothing but sickness and fear. Her schemes mixed superstition with cold calculation, making her one of the most chilling figures in Yorkshire's history. Today, we will explore the shocking story of Mary Bateman, remembered by many as the Witch of Yorkshire. It all began in the windswept farmlands of North Yorkshire in late 1760s, a place where neighbors knew each other by name and secrets were pretty hard to keep. In a modest farmhouse in Isenby, which I'm sure somebody from Yorkshire is going to be angry I pronounced it that way, a baby girl was born to a well-regarded family that farmed. They named her Mary Harker. From the outside, nothing in Mary's early life hinted at what lay ahead. She was a farm girl growing up amongst fields, livestock, the unchanging rhythm of rural days, and just in general, farming. You know, lots of crops. In places like that, childhood mischief was usually fairly harmless. You know, you'd climb a tree, you would steal from your neighbor's crops. Maybe you would not want to do anything that day, so you would just sneak away and go play at the creek. There's many things that you could go do besides just farming. But every now and then, there are children whose mischief feels a little different. Those who knew Mary when she was young would later speak of certain moments that seemed too deliberate for a child. One story told of her quietly gathering items that didn't belong to her, not toys or shiny baubles as they're called, but everyday things someone might truly need. She stored them in a hidden spot, letting the collection grow as though she was waiting for the right time to use them. Perhaps it was the early sign of a mind already thinking in terms of gain and planning, while steps ahead of others who kind of were around her age living in the area at that time. As she grew, her life took a turn that was typical for girls of her station. She left home to work as a servant in a nearby town. Her main duties would be cooking and cleaning, but just in general, her real thing would just be in the background until she was old enough to marry. But Mary was not built for a quiet, obedient life. It wasn't long before her employer noticed missing items. The pattern was clear. Then she was dismissed. What happened next could almost have been predicted, really, if you think about it for a second. Mary found another position she stole again. She lost that job. Each dismissal was another mark against her name. By the time that she was a young woman, her reputation had spread far enough that many households just refused to take her on as a risk of getting stuff stolen from them, so they would basically send her away. Then came an opening, quite literally. Through a family acquaintance, she managed to find work as a dressmaker in the growing industrial city of Leeds. The job wasn't glamorous, it paid little, and it demanded long hours, but Leeds was different from the villages that she had known. It was busy, noisy, and full of strangers. Strangers were easier to deceive. At first, Mary supplemented her meager wages with small thefts, but gradually she found a more profitable way to earn money, one that didn't rely on only picking pockets or taking what was left unguarded. She began to deal in the unseen. Mary claimed she could tell fortunes, mix charms, brew potions, that sort of thing, and really just bring back people's love, or even like turn away bad luck. You know, the crap that you see on Facebook where it's like, thanks to Dr. Kenneth, the love of my life returned. You should go talk to. It's like, that's not how it works. But she spoke of removing evil wishes cast by jealous neighbors. For some clients, she was a mysterious comfort. But for others, she was an unsettling presence who seemed to know just a little too much. What began as petty theft in a barn had grown into something far more dangerous, because Mary was no longer just taking things. She was taking trust and twisting it to her advantage. You can kind of see where this can go wrong. By the early 1790s, Mary was in her mid-20s when she met a wheelwright named John Bateman. It wasn't a slow, measured romance, it was the kind that moved way too quickly, pretty much every time I get into a relationship. The key to life? Take it a little slower, get to know him first. Neighbors barely had time to learn his name before the wedding. 3 weeks after they met, they were married. In the beginning, John might have thought he had found a lively, capable wife. But sometimes it takes only a matter of weeks for the shine to wear off. That is very true, and for a person's true nature to come through. At first, they didn't have a house of their own. Like many young couples, they stayed in a boarding home, sharing the space with other lodgers. This arrangement can be a bit awkward even in the best of times, but for John, it became something far worse. He began to notice whispers, sideways glances from the neighbors, and soon, the reason became quite clear. Mary had been helping herself to the belongings of the other lodgers. Small valuables that, once gone, could easily be explained away as just simply misplaced. For most husbands, this would have been the breaking point, but John didn't turn her in. Instead, he quietly moved them out as though a new address might just completely erase the problem. I think most people would probably do this. I'm learning about attachment styles, and sometimes that does happen in life. But moving did not slow her down. If anything, Mary's schemes grew bolder at this point. She began writing letters, carefully worded and signed, claiming to be on business for wealthy clients. With these forged notes, she persuaded shopkeepers to hand over fine dresses and other goods on the promise that they would be paid later. The goods were never returned. The clients never existed. Then came the scheme that cut closer to home. Mary told John that his father, the town crier back in Thirsk, had fallen dangerously ill. Naturally, John left at once to be by his father's side, and while he was away, Mary emptied the house. Clothes, furniture, anything of value was sold to cover a personal debt that she had to one of her victims. From that point on, the pattern became quite even more predictable. Mary would set up a scam, run it until suspicion grew, and then convince John that they had to leave town. Sometimes they stayed in a place for months, sometimes only weeks. Even when the couple became parents, the moves didn't stop. Mary's crimes had become more than a habit. They were a way of life, and with each new town, she left behind a trail of lies, debts, everything unpaid, and people who just learned a little too late her charm came at a cost. In the years that followed, Mary's name began to swirl through the streets with a whispered warning. The law crossed her path more than once, yet somehow, each time, she walked away untouched. Witnesses went silent, stories changed, and whether it was through the quiet persuasion or bribery, or somehow maybe she intimidated them, really no one could ever prove anything. And in the background stood her husband, John. His role in her schemes remains kind of a puzzle, perhaps an unwilling bystander, perhaps quite accomplice. Some say his enlistment in the army was a desperate bid to escape her endless deceptions, a man driven to the brink by the weight of his wife's ambitions, if you can call them that. But the truth was far stranger. Mary went with him. Their return to Leeds was swift. Barely a year had passed before they were back together, and in 1979 this time, Mary planted herself in Marsh Lane near Quarry Hill in a modest home that soon became anything but ordinary. Here, she adopted the role of a wise woman. A curious blend of Christian prayer and arcane charms. A figure who promised comfort and answers in an age when medicine was scarce and faith often filled the gaps. To many, she seemed like a beacon in the times of need. To others, she was a predator hiding behind piety. Mary's services were broad and suspiciously convenient. She claimed that she could locate stolen goods. If you were sick, she could help you there. Also, you got some animals that are not doing well, she can help out. And allegedly, she even was claiming that she could change the weather itself into compliance. So, psychotic. She preyed on fear and longing, weaving convincing tales to extract money and possessions. One woman was told her husband faced a grim sentence in prison. Desperate to save him, she handed Mary 4 gold pieces. Another convinced her marriage was actually under threat of infidelity. She surrendered nearly everything she owned in exchange for a spell that promised to restore her husband's devotion. But in 1805, Mary revealed perhaps her most audacious scam yet. She began to speak of a remarkable hen, one that could foretell the end of the world. According to Mary, the bird laid eggs, bearing the message, Christ is coming. People hungry for signs and terrified of divine wrath lined up to see it. She charged a penny per viewing, guarding her hen from prying eyes unless payment was made. By now, whispers suggested John was no longer just tolerating her schemes, he was reaping the profits alongside her. But now, Mary had perfected her craft, not just in deceit, but in performance. The Hen of Leeds was her masterpiece. Crowds gathered outside her home, shivering in the cold, clutching their pennies for the privilege of seeing this miracle bird that, according to Mary, could warn humanity of its own doom. Witnesses swore that they had seen it happen with their own eyes, an egg sliding from the hen's body, the words already upon it. Soon, Mary then sold the hen to a neighbor, and the divine messages vanished. The bird laid nothing but ordinary eggs. Whispers began to spread, and eventually the truth would emerge. Mary had been carefully inscribing the prophetic words in ink, and then reinserting the eggs back into the hen's body. Her theatrics didn't stop there. Around this time, she began attending gatherings led by Joanna Southcott, a Christian preacher who warned of the world's imminent end. And here we are in 2025, it did not imminently end. Joanna had a loyal following, and Mary, ever the opportunist, found a way to weave herself into this web of belief. Also, I want to point out something. I'm part of the God Squad on this one, always have been, but nobody knows. Nobody knows. Nobody knows when that time is supposed to come, all right? So if you ever find somebody who claims to know, they're lying to you, to your face. God's not talking to them. He's not telling specifically them if you give him $100 that he'll tell you. It's not happening. So you can identify a liar by what they're saying. Anyway, so she started dropping Joanna's name into her own dealings, implying a personal connection she didn't actually have. No permission was given, but in the business of faith and fear, paperwork mattered little. Mary also drew strength from two shadowy figures in the wise woman trade, Mrs. Moore and Miss Blythe. Mary described Mrs. Moore as the mystical seventh child of a seventh child, a woman who could supposedly strike blind any person who threatened her clients. Miss Blythe, on the other hand, was said to read the stars themselves, divining fates with celestial precision. If you don't know anything about the universe, it's rather big, and if you aim in one direction, you're probably bound to miss things. So, yes, celestial precision. Clients came in droves, believing that they were tapping into this powerful network of supernatural allies. In reality, Mary was running what we now call a spiritual supply chain. She would send letters to these women on behalf of her clients, then sell whatever potions or charms they supposedly recommended. It was business for her, and she knew exactly how to keep the audience paying. Whispers from the period suggest that she may have even dabbled in one of the most dangerous and desperate trades of that time, performing back alley abortions. In an era where medicine was rudimentary and women had few safe options, such procedures often left patients scarred, poisoned, or just outright dead. Whether or not every rumor was true, the association alone paints a chilling picture of the lengths that Mary was willing to go in search of money and influence. Her skill lay not only in her schemes, but in how convincingly she wove them. She had a way of spotting the vulnerable, those in pain, who were anxious about their health, which is pretty much all of us, maybe just desperate for answers, and to them she offered charms, powders, and the promises of this supernatural aid. Her soft voice and polite manners masking the darker reality. People wanted to believe her because hope, right? But it was false. It was easier though than facing the despair, I suppose. And so Mary rarely found herself without paying customers. Yet profit alone was never enough. Greed and a startling lack of conscience seemed to propel her forward, step by step, into far blacker territory. What began with fortune-telling and trickery would soon spiral into something that could no longer be explained away as mere deception. It was about to become absolutely lethal. And the first known tragedy tied directly to her name centered on the Kitchen family, a group of women who ran a small drapery shop in St. Peter's Square, which is in Corey Hill. Mary made herself useful there, occasionally helping with the tasks and earning trust in the way of, well, you could kind of think of it like a fox, kind of hovering unnoticed at the edge of a henhouse. She even entertained them with fortunes, claiming she drew insight from her supposed ally, Miss Blythe, whose name carried a certain mystical weight. Then came the illness. One of the women fell mysteriously sick, and Mary, ever ready to play the part of savior, took charge of her care. She administered powders of her own making, remedies she insisted would heal, but instead of recovery, the shadow of death spread. One by one, all three women were lost. Mary wasted no time in offering an explanation. She told neighbors it was the plague, an invisible terror that communities dreaded and dared not question. In a climate where disease could wipe out entire households overnight, the excuse sounded believable enough. Fear did the rest. No one wanted to challenge her. No one really wanted to risk her wrath or risk catching what she claimed had killed the Kitchens. And so silence covered the truth like a shroud. When the Kitchen family estate was eventually examined by creditors, what they found was a bit unsettling. The drapery shop, once busy with trade, now stood hollow. Shelves were bare, furniture was gone, and curiously, the account books had vanished without a trace. It was as though the very records of their lives had been swallowed up along with their possessions. In an age where investigative methods were rudimentary at best, such irregularities were brushed aside with little resistance because, what are you going to do? Mary's word, which is cold and steady, delivered also with a calm face, was enough to silence the suspicion, at least for the time being. Still, trouble seemed to follow wherever she went. Around the same period, whispers spread of a strange and cruel event. A poor family with several children stumbled upon a cake. To them, it must have felt like luck, a small treasure for hungry mouths. But soon after eating it, every one of them fell violently ill. Neighbors feared the worst. When authorities tested the cake, they found a grim discovery. It had been laced with arsenic. The children survived, though barely. Some believed Mary's hand might be behind the incident, pointing to her reputation. Others argued there was no proof at all, only coincidence. And that was the problem. Many similar poisonings had occurred in this area during those years, some fatal, some not. Without evidence, it was impossible to say which, if any, were truly connected to her. And my advice to everybody listening, if you find a cake out in the open, don't eat it. I get it. These people were hungry, and we're in a different time now, so we don't really need to be eating cake that's just out in the road. But yeah, stay away from that. By 1806, Mary had relocated once more. Her new residence lay in a narrow alley ominously called Black Dog Yard. The name alone seemed to carry the weight of superstition, and it was in this unsettling setting that she met her next clients, William and Rebecca Parrott, a wealthy couple without children. Rebecca's troubles were unusual. She spoke of a constant fluttering inside of her chest, like wings trapped inside of her body. At night, she claimed she was followed by a vision of a black dog, its shadowy form lurking just beyond reach, which the fluttering in her chest is probably just heart palpitations. And, there's actually a lot of lore on black dogs, kind of following you and killing you eventually, but regardless, she also believed spirits haunted her. Today, a doctor might diagnose her with an illness or psychosis. But back then, when superstition carried more weight than science, people often saw such experiences as evidence of a curse, and for that, they sought out a woman like Mary. At first, the couple had placed their hopes in a wandering doctor who offered little more than superstition disguised as medicine. He told them, plainly, that Rebecca's condition is not an illness, but an evil wish. These were doctors back in the day, something unnatural that demanded charms and spells rather than remedies. Yes, where did I put that medical degree? Rebecca's niece, recalling whispers of Mary's uncanny talents, urged them to seek her help. When the couple finally stood before Mary, she did not dismiss their fears. Instead, she leaned into them. She spoke of a mysterious figure, an unseen wise woman she called Miss Blythe, who, she claimed, had the knowledge to lift the curse. But contacting such a figure would not be simple. Letters had to be sent, payments had to be made, rituals had to be followed to the letter, and who was there to help? A total tool bag. To begin this process, Mary told them they would need to part with 4 guineas. This money, she said, would be forwarded to Miss Blythe, who in return had already provided 4 guineas of her own. Those notes would be carefully sewn into a silk purse and then placed under the couple's bed. It was a charm, Mary explained, one that could not be touched for many months or its power would dissolve. It seemed harmless, even hopeful. The couple then complied. After a few weeks later, another letter arrived, its words carrying the same air of urgency as the ones before. But this time, the instructions were oddly specific. The couple was told to fasten 2 iron pieces shaped like horseshoes to their front door, but the task came with a peculiar condition. The nails must not be driven in with a hammer, but with the back of a pair of pincers. Another called for supplies, tea, linen, sugar, even silverware. Grocery shopping. Over time, the requests grew heavier. Sums of money far beyond what most skilled men earned in a year were pressed from them, all with the promise that these sacrifices would drive away the curse. Mary's role in this was careful. She claimed she was only the messenger, relaying the words of Miss Blythe, and each letter came with a warning. Once read, it must be burned immediately, for if evil spirits saw the instructions, they would then twist them into harm. To disobey was an invite of disaster, which I gotta jump in here. I actually had this crap happen to me. Not this stuff specifically. I was trying to buy seats for my Land Cruiser, and the scam guy was like, oh, well, I've already put money into this, so you owe me money. And he basically said that he had my address at this point, and he was going to come to my house. I invited him to. I was like, hey, brother, you'll be dead before you hit the ground if you come to my front door. So he never showed up, unfortunately. But the point is that take this with a grain of salt. Not a grain of salt. Take this actually, like, you understand, scam artists will involve themselves in the scam to make you think that they're with you, is the best way to put it. Never got those seats, but you know what? You can still come to my house, brother. I'd love to see you. So the family, like so many others who feared unseen forces, were trapped by their own belief. They trusted, they obeyed, they gave, and with each visit, Mary's influence over them tightened like an invisible snare. By the spring of 1808, the family received yet another unsettling letter, which I break in. It's called Land Cruiser Parts House. It's on Facebook, I believe. Be aware, the admins are also scam artists. They are in on it. So don't talk to any of them. So this time, it carried a dire warning. An illness was said to be on its way, one that could only be prevented through Mary's guidance. The instructions were oddly specific. They were told to bring her honey, half a pound of it, which she would mix with a mysterious ingredient to prepare puddings that, according to the letter, held the power to save them. I really hope there's not arsenic in there. But there was also a chilling condition. Under no circumstances were they to seek medical help. I really hope there's not arsenic in there. If they failed to follow the ritual precisely, they were warned death itself would claim them, which I'm sure there's arsenic in there and they're gonna die. So the couple, then gripped by fear, complied. They ate the puddings exactly as instructed, same days, same hours, for nearly a week. And nothing seemed unusual. The first puddings tasted ordinary, even comforting, perhaps giving them a false sense of reassurance. But on the 6th day, everything changed. The flavor was so revolting that William could barely manage a single bite. Rebecca, however, forced herself to eat the entire serving, terrified of what might happen if she disobeyed. Almost immediately, waves of violent sickness racked them both, leaving them weakened and in unbearable pain. William's lips turned black, his head pounded with agonizing pressure, and his stomach twisted with searing cramps. Yet, against the odds, he slowly began to recover. Rebecca was not so fortunate. Her condition worsened by the day. Instead of calling for a doctor who told her, the last one said it was an evil wish, she clung to the belief that breaking the rules would seal their fate, and so she endured the torment. By May 24th, her suffering reached its tragic end. Historical accounts describe her final moments as horrific, her tongue grotesquely swollen, her features distorted beyond recognition. Yet even then, William did not link his wife's death to the strange puddings or to Mary or Miss Blythe. To him, it was all proof that the curse and the warnings in those letters were terrifyingly real. Later, a surgeon examined Rebecca's body and strongly suspected foul play. The suspicion deepened when it was discovered that even a household cat had died after just nibbling on the leftovers. Still, nothing came about it. Many simply accepted tragedy as destiny rather than evidence of deliberate harm. By the time October had arrived, William had already been corresponding with Mary and her so-called spiritual guide for quite some time. He had also been spending money on the various objects she insisted were essential for protecting his household. In fact, nearly a year and a half had gone by since he had first been told never to disturb the charms hidden under his bed. At first, William obeyed, trusting that whatever was hidden there might truly be safeguarding his home. But as the months dragged on, curiosity got the better of him. He wanted reassurance that his sacrifices and his silence had not been in vain. When he finally pulled out the bundle tucked away underneath the bedhead, he expected to see expensive notes carefully sewn into silk purses, just as Mary and her supposed guide had promised. Instead, all he uncovered were just decaying cabbage leaves. In that instance, the entire facade came crashing down. Every letter, every instruction, every supposed blessing that had been given to them was nothing more than a carefully woven lie. With this realization, William understood the bitter truth. His wife had not died by fate or illness, at least nothing caused supernatural, but had been deliberately poisoned. And the person behind it was the very woman he had once trusted to heal and protect them. Determined to expose this deception, he set a trap, pretending to remain interested in further potions. William arranged a meeting with Mary, but this time he had already contacted the authorities, warning them of her crimes. When Mary arrived, she carried with her a bottle filled with a suspicious mixture, oatmeal blended with arsenic. It seemed to be that she kind of intended to finish what she had started, perhaps hoping to silence William as she had silenced Rebecca. But the police were waiting. As soon as they moved to arrest her, Mary attempted to twist the story, claiming that William had been the one trying to sell her the deadly potion. It was a feeble defense. The officers quickly saw through the act and then placed her under arrest, because how would you know that you were being arrested for the potion? Otherwise, this woman sucks. So a search of her home stripped away the last fragments of her disguise. Items the family had entrusted to be sent to the mysterious Miss Blythe were found scattered around her house, kept and used by Mary herself. Bottles of poison were also found, including mercuric chloride, the very substance that had poisoned Rebecca. The evidence was overwhelming. Mary would be taken to York Castle to await trial, but in those days, trials were not scheduled swiftly. The court only met at certain points throughout the year, and so months passed before her case was even heard. It was March of 1809 when Mary Bateman finally stood before the judges. Her defense was thin. She tried once again to shift blame onto the elusive Miss Blythe, claiming she had only been the messenger, but the prosecution quickly dismantled the story. Handwriting comparisons revealed that every supposed letter from Miss Blythe had in fact been written by Mary herself. She had charged the family for postage, pocketed the money, forged the replies, and then kept the goods that her fake letters demanded. What the family experienced was not a one-off trick, but a pattern Mary had been perfecting for years. Witnesses poured in from all across Leeds. Shopkeepers testified to selling her arsenic. Neighbors spoke of her long history of fraud and intimidation, and it soon became clear to many that Mary was not just a harmless, wise woman, but the mastermind behind earlier tragedies, including the mysterious deaths of the Kitchen family a few years before. Some believe she had intended to treat that family in the same way, slowly poisoning them until she could rob them of their possessions, just as she had done in previous cases. The most powerful piece of evidence came from a surgeon who re-examined Rebecca's remains. He confirmed that the pudding that she had eaten contained a deadly quantity of this poison. The physical symptoms suffered by William and Rebecca matched mercury poisoning almost exactly, leaving little doubt that Rebecca had been deliberately killed at Mary's hands. The jury needed little time to deliberate. They returned with a verdict of guilty. The presiding judge delivered a severe statement, declaring that in crimes such as these, the gates of mercy were closed to her. Mary was sentenced to death by hanging. In a final attempt to escape her fate, Mary shocked the courtroom by claiming that she was pregnant. At that time, the law required that if a woman was found to be more than 4 months along, her execution would be delayed until after childbirth. Immediately, many of the women in the gallery tried to leave, fearing that they might be chosen to serve on what was called a jury of matrons, a panel of married women tasked with examining the accused. The judge, however, ordered the doors locked and selected 12 women from those present. Mary was then taken to a separate room where the matrons quickly determined that she was lying. Her claim of pregnancy was dismissed, and she was returned to her cell to await execution. While imprisoned, a reverend visited repeatedly, hoping that she would confess before her death, yet Mary remained stubborn and unrepentant, showing neither guilt nor remorse. Even behind bars, Mary didn't abandon her manipulative ways. She quickly learned how to prey on the hopes of those around her, often twisting superstition to her advantage. In one instance, a younger inmate longed to be reunited with someone that she loved. Mary convinced her that by paying for a special charm, the meeting could be guaranteed. When the so-called charm was finally opened, the young prisoner discovered the bitter truth. The money she had entrusted with Mary had quietly vanished. Word of the trick quickly spread, and the deception reached the ears of the prison governor. To prevent further unrest amongst the inmates, he ordered Mary to return what little remained of the stolen sum. It was a humiliating end to yet another one of her manipulations. In the hours before her execution, Mary turned her attention back to her family. She penned a letter to her husband, carefully enclosing her wedding ring. In that message, she asked that it be passed down to her daughter, a strange mix of affection and confession. She admitted to dishonest dealings, but still insisted that she had never meant for anyone to lose their life as a result of her actions. On the morning of her death, she was walked towards the gallows. The massive crowd fell strangely silent. Some whispered that perhaps she would summon unearthly powers to escape at the very last moment, a rumor born from years of fear and superstition. But as the noose tightened, reality settled in. She did not vanish, and just before the trapdoor opened, a reverend urged her to confess, but Mary once more claimed innocence. Moments later, the lever was pulled, and her life ended on March 20th, 1809. Back in Leeds, the spectacle continued long after her final breath. It's said that more than 2,000 people paid a small fee just at a chance to see her remains return to town. The streets became a strange carnival of grief and curiosity. By midnight, her body finally arrived, and people lined up in the flickering lamplight to take a glimpse. But what came after was even more disturbing. Mary's corpse was taken to Leeds General Infirmary, where it was dissected for study. Her skin was later stripped and tanned, with scraps of it sold as grisly talismans meant to protect their owners from evil. In the public imagination, these details only deepened her legend, fueling the belief that she had been guilty of far more crimes than the courts ever proved. Many began to call her Yorkshire's very own witch. Her skeleton remained on display in Leeds' Thackeray Medical Museum for generations until more recently when it was finally removed. Yet stories claim that Mary never truly left. Visitors and staff whispered that her ghost still haunts, searching for new victims in the old halls. And she isn't the only one. Other specters are said to actually roam this museum as well. Strange knocks, sudden chills, and unseen hands grabbing at passerbys have been reported so often that paranormal investigators have made this site a regular stop. These stories suggest that the building carries not just medical history, but also the weight of unfinished lives, possibly remaining fears and voices that refuse to fall silent, although hers probably deserves to fall silent. So, I always like to break in at the end of these things, and I always like to say that too. It's probably pretty standard that I'm breaking in at the end of these things. Now, I'm going to kind of approach this from a standpoint of my phone going off, but I'm going to approach it from a standpoint of she's a scam artist. That's it. She's not supernatural. She's not a witch. She's not something special. She is literally a kleptomaniac that continued into being a scam artist, that to get people's stuff, she was willing to poison people and kill them. So, I don't know. I get why people want things to be supernatural, especially in this time frame when you simply had something as, small as a germ that could just take you out. And I mean, we have antibiotics right now and we think we're so removed from these complexities, I guess is the best way to put it. But life back then, life is scary now. life was terrifying then. You had no idea what was going to take you out. You have no idea why anybody was getting sick, and you had no idea why anything bad was even happening. A lot of people put their faith in God, and it's like, maybe I'm being punished, maybe I'm not, I don't know. Still to this day, people do that. But the key to life, like me getting scammed out of some Land Cruiser seats, you have to know, you have to approach every situation with suspicion, especially with others, especially with people who claim to help, right? Some people, most people, genuinely just want to help. Right? It makes people feel good to help out others. It's a social bonding technique. But sometimes when you have people who are complete strangers that want to help you, that is a problem because they don't know you. So there's no social bonding that's supposed to take place. And because of that, that means you should probably regard them as they want something from you in exchange for what they're doing. So that's just a good way to approach life, I think. Again, one guy who scammed me out of those seats. If you want to come to my front door, come and knock on my door. Apart from that, I'm not going to sing to you guys. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed learning about the Witch of Yorkshire. If you did enjoy, then please leave a like, as it helps get the video out there. And subscribing is a great way to stay up to date on my posts, as we might actually get to 300,000 at some point in my life. Probably not. Anyways, I want to thank my patrons real quick. At the Literal Wendigo tier, we have Grayson West, Invictus Echo, Monkey Man, and Scrungle. Thank you guys for your awesome support. At the Eyewitness Event tier, we have Beaver Malaga and Dragon Master Knight. Thank you guys as well. And at the secondhand accounts tier, Bianca, Fred Rush, Pouches, Stutz, and Troy. And to the rest of my patrons, I do appreciate y'all's support as well. It goes a long way towards helping out, so thank you. But all right, that's going to do it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed, and we'll see y'all in the next one.